Today we're going to be reading Psalm 132. The overwhelming theme of the book of Psalms is the King of Glory coming to Jerusalem. A lot of the Psalms point to Jerusalem, the celebration of worship there, the presence of God there, and the future work of the Lord that is going to be coming to Jerusalem. This is a psalm of petition and praise. It is a royal psalm, a messianic psalm, and it is the longest of the psalms of ascent. This psalm includes within it the nation's prayers for David's royal descendants, which looks ahead all the way to our Messiah. The emphasis of this psalm is the excitement of going up to Jerusalem, to the dwelling place of the Lord. Jerusalem is God's city, but the completion of the temple was not an assurance of God's blessing on Israel. The important thing was that the people fulfill their responsibilities towards the Lord. And we'll go ahead and start in verse 1 of Psalm 132. Lord, remember David and all that he suffered. He made a solemn promise to the Lord. He vowed to the Mighty One of Israel, I will not go home. I will not let myself rest. I will not let my eyes sleep, nor close my eyelids in slumber, until I find a place to build a house for the Lord, a sanctuary for the Mighty One of Israel. The author of this psalm petitioned God to remember the hardships that David endured. Humanly speaking, without David, there would have been no temple. David was passionate about God's presence and worship, and he was passionate about having a house for both God's presence and for worship to God. God provides protection and blessing in times of hardship. The ark represented God's throne on this earth, and its rightful place was in the Holy of Holies of God's sanctuary. Unless God is on the throne of our lives, nothing that we do will truly be successful. David had two great ambitions: to bring the ark to Jerusalem and to build a glorious temple to house it. David was driven by the need and the desire to find a dwelling place for God and his ark. He made a vow to the Lord, but the Lord only allowed him to fulfill the first part of that vow. This desire turned into a hardship for David because he was not allowed to build God a dwelling place like he had hoped, and he wanted so desperately to do so. God did, however, assure David that his son Solomon would be the one to build the temple of worship, and David fought and won many battles collecting the materials that would be needed and the wealth that was going to be needed for the building project. We're going to continue in verse 6. We heard that the ark was in Ephrathah, and then we found it in the distant countryside of Jaar. Let us go to the sanctuary of the Lord. Let us worship at the footstool of his throne. Arise, O Lord, and enter your resting place, along with the ark, the symbol of your power. May your priests be clothed in godliness. May your loyal servants sing for joy. The writer moved from David's hardships to David's descendants. They had heard the ark was near Bethlehem in an area called Ephrathah, and they found it in the fields of Jaar, also known as Kiriath Jearim. It had been there for 20 years before it was also taken to Jerusalem, which 1 Samuel 7 verse 1 and 2 revealed to us. God's throne is in heaven, and his footstool is this earth. In this context, his footstool in verse 7 refers to worship at the Ark of the Covenant on this earth. The Ark had been through a lot, including going before the people in the wilderness and leading them across the Jordan River into the Promised Land. It finally rested at Shiloh. The wicked sons of Eli used the Ark as a good luck charm and took it into battle against the Philistines, but the Philistines ended up capturing it as a result. Frightened by God's judgments, the Philistines ultimately returned the ark back to the Jewish nation, where it stayed in the house of Abinadab in Kiriath Jearim for the next 20 years. We get the impression that the ark was almost forgotten during those years that it was present at the house of Abinadab. When David became king, he wanted the ark to be brought back to Jerusalem, and he prepared a tent for it. Kiriath Jearim was only 8 miles northwest of Jerusalem, so distance was not a problem for the move. However, in 2 Samuel 6, we learn that his first attempt to move the ark failed miserably. The ark then remained at the house of Obed-Edom for the next 3 months. David then successfully did bring the ark back to the throne in Jerusalem. As a result, people were once again drawn to go to Jerusalem to worship the Lord. In 1 Kings 8, when Solomon put the ark into the Holy of Holies, the glory of God moved in, just like when Moses dedicated the tabernacle in Exodus 40. The Lord could now rest in his earthly house. A holy priesthood was important to the prosperity of Israel, but so was a nation dedicated to the Lord. The Israelites who sang the psalm were determined to go and worship God on Mount Zion, to the place in Jerusalem where the ark rested, referred to here as God's footstool. That was where God dwelt in a localized way among his people during this time. It was his earthly throne. They called on God to meet them there. They spoke of the ark as God's strength because it represented God's strength in Israel's previous battles. Where the presence of the Lord is, there is victory. And we'll continue in verse 10. For the sake of your servant David, do not reject the king you have anointed. The Lord swore an oath to David with a promise that he will never take back. I will place one of your descendants on your throne. If your descendants obey the terms of my covenant and the laws that I teach them, then your royal line will continue forever and ever. God's covenant with Israel assured them that one of David's descendants would sit on the throne. The psalmist reminded the Lord of his covenant because he wanted someone from the Davidic dynasty to sit on the throne of Israel. The author asked God to send his anointed one to them as he had promised. The author asked for God to put everything back into its place in the city, the ark, his king, and his godly people in worship. The psalmist begged God not to turn away from them because he had promised them his anointed one, in that his anointed one would be their king forever. Ultimately, this promise is completely fulfilled in and through Jesus, the Son of David, whose throne and kingdom are forever. Today we are united with the Lord in a new covenant that Jesus made with his own blood, and he will never break that covenant. The Father is faithful to his Son, and the Son is faithful to the covenant that he made with his own blood. When we surrender to Jesus and are obedient to his will, and when we are faithful to him, we are covered by his blood in and through the new covenant of Jesus, the blood that he shed for us on the cross. And this covenant promise can never be broken. We are his, and we are held safely in his arms for all eternity. And we'll continue in verse 13. For the Lord has chosen Jerusalem. He has desired it for his home. This is my resting place forever, he said. I will live here, for this is the home I desired. I will bless the city and make it prosperous. I will satisfy its poor with food. I will clothe its priests with godliness. Its faithful servants will sing with joy. Here I will increase the power of David. My anointed one will be a light for my own people. I will clothe his enemies with shame, but he will be a glorious king. God not only chose Israel to be his people, but he chose David and his descendants to be his kings. He chose Zion to be the site of his temple and his throne. Other nations had temples, but none of those temples had the glory of the one and only true and living God dwelling right there with them. God reaffirmed his covenant with Israel. God promised to dwell with Israel. He promised to provide their food, to bless their worship, and to defeat their enemies. The psalmist reminded God that he swore to David his descendants would reign on the throne forever. The promise to David was specific in terms of God's intended blessings on those who are faithful, his correction to those who are not, and his ultimate fulfillment in the anticipation of the coming Son of God, the Son of David, who will rule and reign, and does rule and reign, now and forever. This psalm ends by pointing us straight to Jesus. The psalmist was concerned about the Ark of the Covenant, but the Ark points to Jesus, who is enthroned in the Holy of Holies at the heavenly throne of God today. We see not an earthly Zion, but the heavenly Zion, and we rejoice that we are a kingdom of priests because of the grace of God, which we see in Revelation chapter 1, verses 5 through 6. God chose Zion, Jerusalem, to be his home and his resting place forever. God will bless his people in his city, clothe his priests with salvation, and the people will shout for joy in response. To shout for joy literally means to utter loudly, and it is used to describe a hearty, joyful singing. Our Messiah will continue to wear the crown while his enemies will be clothed in shame. The Messiah's kingdom has been established forever spiritually, and the day is coming when his kingdom will also be established on earth as it is in heaven. We are at the hour of grace right now. We are in the season of salvation. Now is the time to be desperate for Jesus and point others to his saving grace. It's up to us to surrender all to the power and the authority of our eternal King who loves us more than we can comprehend, and he died for us to prove it. There's no authority or power that I'd rather surrender to than the power and authority of our loving Savior, our Messiah, Jesus. We can choose to give God his rightful place in our hearts and lives, worship him joyfully with every last exhale, and obediently rest in his faithful promises. He will never let us down. He is faithful forever. Thanks, y'all. I hope you're having a glorious day in the Lord.